Wow, is it that time already? Thank you, thank you, thank you. So, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the eighth installment of SHFM's Conversation That Matter series presented by SHFM's Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Council. So today's conversation, we're going to focus on stronger cross generations building inclusive workplaces. So my name is Courtney Willis, and I'm the chair of SHFM's DEIB Council. And I'm also the vice president of DEIB and culture at Restaurant Associates. So thank you so very much for joining us. So we want to kind of jump right in, and I just have a few quick reminders. First of all, we would love to know who's out there. So if you haven't done so already, please let us know by dropping in your name as well as your generation in the chat. And this is going to be a great opportunity. You're going to get an opportunity to participate in the session today. And we're going to have a breakout room, which is approximately about halfway through this session. It's going to be guided by our panelists. And the breakout rooms will allow us to dive deeper into the conversation with some industry colleagues. And so we know that you're going to have some burning questions and can't wait to talk about them. But please hold those questions until you get into the breakout rooms. And then just also to note that the beginning of this discussion will be recorded so it can be played on demand. So this recording will be available on the SHFM website and YouTube later this week, along with our amazing playlist. However, the breakout sessions will not be recorded. So that'll give you a chance to really have that in-depth dialogue. And lastly, there will be a quick 60-second evaluation of this session. The link will be provided at the end of the chat. And so we really want you to share your thoughts with us as we continue to plan SHFM events. And also, just to note, the opinions expressed today by today's experts are not necessarily those of SHFM's or the organizations represented. Yes. All righty. So I have a few other things for us. And of course, we have to mention our upcoming events. And so this is another great opportunity to network with SHFM and also some industry colleagues. So first, we have our North Texas local, which is at the Chicken and Pickle on April 16th, next week. The Philadelphia local is April 23rd, and that's at the Curate Culinary Center. Then next, we have the NRA Networking Breakfast, which is on May 19th, and that is at the Union League Club of Chicago. And also, save the date for the SHFM Foundation Gala, which is November 10th at Inside Park in New York. And last but not least, I want to remind everyone about the 2025 SHFM National Conference. It's September 16th through the 18th at the beautiful Renaissance Esmeralda Resort and Spa in Palm Springs. So the hotel block will be opening very soon, and I encourage you to please book your rooms early. So be sure to check out the SHFM website because I know there are going to be some announcements coming up soon. Perfect. So just to give you a little bit of background, so today's SHFM educational program was definitely developed by your peers, and I want to say a very special thank you to the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Council for their tremendous work in developing and creating this session. And to provide you some background on the council, the council exists to foster an environment that embraces diversity and inclusion at all levels within the markets that we serve. You know, our goal is to increase the diversity of membership, champion employment opportunities, and to highlight, encourage in procurement opportunities for minority-owned businesses within the food service industry. And also we serve as an advocate to bring awareness to diversity issues surrounding the hospitality workplace segment. Our goal is to assist, support, and encourage our members to better understand the importance of diversity and what it means to our organization and the industry as a whole. So here we go. Excited. Thank you. So as we just jump right in, I'm so excited about this. But before we get into the full panel, we definitely want to provide everyone with a reference point, right? As far as when we talk about multi-generational workplace.
What's the problem?
And to put all this into perspective, I'm going to turn it over to our first panelist, Erin Kate Wickham. And she's going to, if you could just introduce yourself, Mary Kate, and then just give us a little background as far as what does this all say?
Yeah, hi, I'm Erin Kate Woodcomb. I'm very passionate about creating a positive work culture, workplace culture. And I've done some significant studying about this generational workplace dynamics, and I'm very happy that we're doing this. Right now, we have 4 generations in the workplace, and in some places, even 5, unexpectedly. So when you think about the generations, we think about them in terms of what year we were born. So for right now, the people in the workforce come from the baby boomers, which is the typically the oldest in the workforce right now, even though there's some that are past that, still in the workplace. Baby boomers were born between about 1946 and 1964. Right after the World War II, there was a spike in births. That's where the name baby boomers came from. And it was a flourishing economy. There was then civil unrest and another war draft. It was considered the activist generation. Each of these generations has sort of a defining moment in it, and this would be probably the passing of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that helped define how these people have moved through the world. Generation X, born 1965 to 1980, roughly, known as the neglected middle child. Try not to cry for me. Latchkey generation. Parents were working, the children were often left alone, so typically referred to as the independent generation. And we grew up, I'm self-identifying, in the AIDS crisis. That would be probably a pretty defining moment for us. The millennials is a term that came up for Gen Y, and millennials were born about between 1981 and 1996. They witnessed the rapid rise of technology and a world that felt a little less safe with globalization. Parents were challenged with creating a sense of safety. So you've heard the term helicopter parents. There's a lot of sort of protection around those children at the time they were growing up. So these millennials are now the leaders in our workforce. And a very defining moment for that generation would be the 9/11 attacks. Of course, we've all been through these things, but if you think about how that sits for each generation. And then Generation Z, born between 1997 and 2012. They are considered digital natives, which means they were born into technology. Social media apps, a global world, they're experiencing the world in a way that hasn't been felt before. Also known as Zoomers and iGeneration. And they have a great concern and focus on climate change issues and the global workforce, economy, and relationships. And defining for them was the COVID-19 pandemic. This is an interesting quote I want to share with you. Children now love luxury. They have bad manners, contempt for authority, they show disrespect for elders, and love chatter in place of exercise. Children are now tyrants, not the servants of their households. They no longer rise when elders enter the room. Now, if you didn't see that this was Socrates, you might think this was your mom or your dad. This is important because we have some perception, I think each of us on our own level, that our generation has suffered or that the next generation doesn't understand. And this has existed since the dawn of man. So just be aware of that over the course of your life and sort of interacting with the world and interacting with those people at work. We are all learning. So keep that in mind as you move through the world, that this is not a new phenomenon.
So thank you so much, Erin Kate, for that, just to give us some grounding with this. And so with that being said, I would like to introduce the remaining panel for today's session. And one thing to know is that we kept our generations, hidden. We didn't do our bios on purpose because we wanted you to really dive into today's session. So after today, our bios will be posted on the website. And so please, I encourage all of you to check them out. And so with that being said, let's get started. So let's have our first panelist, Harpreet. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and your generation?
Good afternoon, Harpreet Cheema. I'm with Sodexo and I am a millennial.
Great. Mark?
Hi, everyone. I'm Mark Freeman. I work for Day One Hospitality Consulting. And let's see, I think I'm a boomer.
Great. Fantastic. Lauren?
Hi, everyone. I'm Lauren. I work for Compass Group and I'm Gen Z.
And then you met Aaron Kate, and you self-disclosed already, Aaron Kate. But
I
go
blew
ahead,
it.
you can
I'm
say
sorry.
your company.
Yes, my company is Working Courage and I am the founder CEO.
Fantastic. And again, I'm Courtney Willis. I'm your moderator today, and I actually represent Gen X as well. So we gave you a little context as far as conversations that matter, and you've got a chance to meet the panelists. So now we're going to jump into a little bit of fun with some polling questions. And so these are quotes by each one of our panelists, and let's see if you all can guess the generation. Okay, the next one coming up soon. Interesting. All right. This is great. All right, number 3 is coming up. Where's number 3 coming? Maybe not. Did we lose a few? We might have lost a few.
Having a little trouble with poll number 3. Let me go to 4.
4 is fine, and then we can jump right into our conversation. It's fine.
Having a little trouble with that. We may have to circle back.
Nope, that's not a problem at all. So really, this is fantastic, actually, segue right into our panel, because again, the two goals for today is, one, we want to debunk the myths, and discuss fostering collaboration across our generations. And the other piece is obviously leveraging diverse strengths and creating an inclusive workplace, where all employees can thrive. So as we dive right in, this is what I'm excited about. And each one of you can say, because interestingly enough, they're popping up now. And I'll go ahead and as you guys answer, I'll define the first question, then you guys also part of and we do this discussion, because this is going to be just a wonderful discussion. You can actually say which one was your quote and see how many people actually got those right. So keep in mind how you answered. All right, so let's dive right in, panelists. Are we ready? I hope we're all ready. Okay. So the first question is, how do the different generations prefer to communicate? And, what challenges do you, that arise from these differences? And maybe Lauren, do you want to jump in?
Sure, I can jump in. I want to talk about the poll first, though.
Well, you can say which one was your quote. So I
Sure. So actually, I do wear a suit to work every day, and I go to work 5 days a week. So it's kind of funny to see that everyone kind of thought the complete opposite. But that's actually great. So we can kind of debunk those myths. But for different communication, personally as Gen Z, I feel like I prefer written communication or those quick Teams messages. It kind of allows for me to kind of take a moment to think about what I have to say, especially since I'm the youngest in the workplace, don't have the most experience, kind of being the most confident with my answer, and being able to write it down first kind of makes me feel the most comfortable sharing my ideas and thoughts.
So I'm on the other end of that spectrum. I would just like to jump in and haven't got time for texts, and I haven't got time for, emails or whatnot. If you're in a meeting, let's get to the point, let's get on it and do it. So that's kind of, I guess, my perspective around that. And my question was the one about technology, and I kind of got a kick out of Lauren's with the suits, because everybody thought it was suits, and man, I haven't worn a suit in forever. So it's kind of interesting how you all chose that one. But anyway, that's like I say, when I'm in meetings, that's what I want to do, is just let's get to the point, let's get going and get out of here.
And before we jump into the other two, Mark, can you describe maybe what some of the challenges are when as far as having that approach? Again, that's kind of your
Yeah.
MO.
So yeah, the challenges are is that normally, and I mean the world I've worked in, I was, I spent some time at Microsoft, I spent some time at LinkedIn. And there's obviously other generations in the meetings besides my generation, and I'm usually the only boomer in the room. And so again, I think it's challenging for me, because again, they kind of think a little bit like what Lauren brought forward, is that they you want to kind of talk about it, and let's kumbaya and get together and think, and I'm just like, okay, let's. What's the question? Let's get to the answer.
Yeah,
So Harpreet.
I was going to say I kind of agree with sort of Mark's piece of very direct, as a sort of my team know, but yeah, I'm the one that's been at the same company for around 15 years as a millennial, where we're kind of known for jumping around and being a bit disloyal to organizations. So I thought that was an interesting one. It does scare me sometimes, but I'm very grateful for my career. For me, I think the communication style from my end is probably more Teams, Slack, those instant messaging, which and text is really the only way to get a hold of me. I despise emails. Like I just don't have the time. I can't, I'm sure similar to everyone else, is having things written down formally and kind of structured in that way after every meeting. Like, we've already spoken about it, why do I need to follow it up? The challenges with that, especially I noticed that some of my team are on the call as well, is that ignoring emails can sometimes come back round when you don't have things documented, and those sort of areas as well. And I find sort of being in that middle area at the moment, you kind of got both ends of the spectrum. Some people want to hit you by Teams, some want to go for an email, so you're kind of having to cover a lot of different channels and make sure that you're still on your phone, and sometimes you can't actually just focus, as Mark says, on that topic or that discussion that you're trying to do that in that meeting.
And Aaron, Kate, thank you so much, Harpreet, for that. I'm really interested from your lens, just because so much of your work has been built around this. And so I would like to hear more as far as the whole communication and how those challenges can impact that workplace.
I think knowing who's on your team is unbelievably critical. I mean, from a generational perspective, but also from a personality type, and having some agreements about your team and how you communicate, so that you don't have the Harpreets ignoring everything, or feeling like you're getting texts and sending Mark off a cliff. We really understanding how your team prefers to work and getting an agreement around that is really helpful. I think that was one of the best things that I learned. I had somebody on a team who we were having a significant customer crisis. And this guy was out on the road, and we're trying to triangulate a solution. And he's literally in the car and responding to texts. And he didn't realize we had a whole group of people on this text. So he was responding to one person every time he got another text. And so he's the one who was actually heading to meet with the customer. And when I finally met with him and I said, well, whatever happened with this? Like, that we were all talking, and it turns out he didn't know how to reply to all. And so this was something that was completely unknown to me, that was even possible. And so having, and then I rather than, I mean, my first reaction is what? And then having to go through the process of checking myself, and understanding, you know, what I didn't understand, and that was a possible training point on my team. So that was something that, you know, as we talked and met to problem solve in the future, we addressed how that all works, and what works for us in terms of an acute problem solving moment. And that was definitely generational, but also someone who doesn't really work in an office very often. So, yeah, so that for me, communication is a super important. Some people are really big emailers, and do a lot of stuff. One of the best things for me, I have been introduced in the workplace is Slack, because you can talk about something relative to a particular topic that's in a channel. So everything about that topic is there, and rather than scrolling through a whole 1,000 emails. And so I think there's a lot of ways that we can improve our communication simply by making agreements, and understanding what tools we have, and being open to new tools too.
Agreed. And I think that's a perfect segue, actually, when we talk about like strategies as far as cross collaboration, because it's really, as you mentioned before, getting to know your team, and not so much focus on the generation, but obviously the individual. But that really gets into, you know, what are some things that have really worked well, you know, as far as the whole idea of collaboration. And I know it's great that you guys are in, you know, different pieces of our industry. And so, you know, Lauren, you know, as you kind of mentioned, having to have things like well thought out, and I love that approach. What are some things that have kind of helped you, because you're in a position as far as communication is key as far as what you do? So if you want to kind of kick us off as far as what has worked well as far as collaboration for you.
I would say being comfortable to speak up if you have any questions. I feel like, again, being the youngest one, you kind of don't want to be the one that's always raising their hand, kind of all eyes on you, but that will kind of cause problems in the long run. So making sure that you kind of know your task at hand, are comfortable with asking questions, kind of being an active participant in the meeting is really important, and kind of getting over that hump of being uncomfortable with that is very important.
I think just building on that, creating a safe space is probably how I sort of call that. You know, recently we did a project that normally takes sort of 6 weeks and 9 days, with an army of people. We're very grateful for all of them, but the only way we did that was setting sort of like that contract, as Erin Kate mentioned at the start, of this is how we want to work. It's open, there's no silly questions, so we can all just get the job done. And it was amazing seeing those people be able to just be themselves and communicate how they wanted to, but at the end of the day we're all sort of coming together with that singular focus of a goal.
Yeah, for me, you know, kind of piggybacking on what Lauren was talking about, you know, when I was at Microsoft, there's a lot of young people around, and I was in a position to be, you know, making decisions on menus, on signage, on all kinds of different things related to the food program. And at one point I realized, you know, I'm looking at things through a boomer's eyes instead of my customer's eyes. And so what I did was brought a group of you know, generational people into the room, and we met every other week. And it was like a Shark Tank kind of a thing where I pitched, you know, our teams pitched these ideas to this group, and, you know, and got feedback. So we started to, you know, get our get our programs aligned around our customers. And it was an interesting, you know, the way that it kind of developed, because the first few meetings, just like what you were saying, Lauren, is that everybody was really quiet and didn't say much. And so, but what I did is kind of sat back and caused, you know, the quietness in the room, and all of a sudden they started to, you know, kind of speak up. And probably, you know, I don't know, the fourth or fifth meeting, they really got engaged, and this team really kind of came together and started to, you know, solve problems. And, you know, one of the funny things that came out of it is that, you know, I asked them, what should we put on the menu? And they came up with crickets. And, you know, a boomer looks at crickets and says, wait a minute, no thanks. And, but they had a purpose around it, because a cricket only consumes as much water as it gets from its food. And so they were looking at it from a sustainability standpoint, which you know, it was like, I hadn't even thought about that kind of stuff. So it was really kind of interesting how it all developed. But again, you know, once they opened up, man, it was great.
Oh, fantastic. Aaron, Kate?
I think when you've got a room full of people who are pulled together to make a decision, and which is typically why you have actual live meetings, is because you need some kind of a consensus or a direction. Otherwise, you would probably not have a meeting. Is really asking, and this is exactly what Mark just said, and which is great. Actively asking each individual, or just being quiet and hoping they'll show up. But sometimes in Lauren, like as Lauren pointed out, being careful about how you show up, and not being too inquisitive, not asking too many questions, but also trying not to be silent. I think there's a number of people in meeting situations who sort of suffer through that a little bit. But when we think about this from a generational perspective, if I'm the oldest person in the room, I might not want to say anything, because I want other people to talk. I want other people to show up and feeling like they're more relevant. But at certain times I feel like, you know, I got to say something. I need to represent my people, you know. So I think there's an interesting dynamic to really being inclusive, actively inclusive. The person who is least participatory probably has some kind of, you know, fear, or feels like what they're going to say is unimportant or inadequate or redundant. So I think from a generational perspective, noticing if there's an outlier in the room, like a very young person or an extremely old person, just kidding. If you've got those different, that sort of ageist perspective of seeing each end of the generations that are in the workplace, really seeing them and actively including their opinions. It needs to be important to you and intentional.
And I like that, because I think it goes back to Harpreet when he said creating that safe space. And I think for all, because I think the assumption sometimes is that those of us who have quote unquote experience in the workplace, but not understand that we might have those same kind of anxieties around, like you said, new pieces relates to sustainability and technology and some other pieces. And then what Lauren brought up is the idea that I'm a little younger, I don't really have the experience. Is my opinion or what I have to say going to be valued? You know, so really being able to create those spaces and being intentional, as you said, Aaron, Kate. And I think that's what's very important, you know, with all of it. I think it really does start with having that safe space. And I think that's so very important as we continue to have those dialogues, which really gets into like the last question that we had as far as, you know, how do we create those kind of environments, right? So we talked about how it's important, but how do you make sure that every generation feels seen and heard, because we each have our little nuances, right? So Harpreet, I'm going to have you jump in, you know, to this piece. Yeah.
Yeah, I think sort of continuing on around how do you create those sort of safe spaces, or really understanding who you're working with. There's a number of tools out there. I'm sure we've all done like disc profiles, but one that I've recently used that really helped was Clifton Strengths. And that kind of starts to highlight not just how you behave, but some of the areas that you want to improve on. So I think around that, that's a really easy tool to look and understand your team and those different generational pieces. The other piece, I think, is around when there's an emergency. And I know that everyone in this call is probably dealing with an emergency or a fire somewhere on the side at the moment, but be really conscious when that happens. As human beings, we have a way of reverting to type. So very quickly you forget sort of about that inclusion, that safe space. You just go to what's natural to you. So especially in those situations, I think that's a time to be even more hyper aware of creating that space and making sure you are balancing things rather than just trying to rush through it.
Perfect. I don't know who wants to jump in.
I'll jump in. Some of the time that I spent at LinkedIn, again, I was surrounded by young people, and at first I was a little intimidated by it. But LinkedIn had this. They had specific groups of people that would get together once a month. They were employee-run kind of discussion groups or whatever, and I started to look into it, and the one that I joined was called Wisdom, and it was for people that were of the boomer generation. And surprisingly enough, there was a lot of young people that came to that meeting. And one of the things that came forward for me was the realization that it's hard to manage somebody like me. If you're young and I'm sure there's some intimidation that happens on their end to be able to try and deal with me having had this long career and all the fires, like you said, that we've been through. And it was I guess eye-opening for me, because I didn't think about that kind of a relationship, that my boss might be a lot younger than me. And in this case was. And so I had to kind of sit back and understand that relationship a lot better than I did before I joined this wisdom group. So that was a great tool for me.
I would say, allowing enough time for everybody to participate is probably a good tool. Because kind of to Harpreet's point about knowing all of your individual employees and doing things like Clifton Strengths Finders or disc profiling, you get to have a sense of where people sort of are in how they work. But I also think, when I came up in the workplace, I was mentored wonderfully by the generations before me. I have an unbelievably deep respect for those who have gone before me. So, and I feel like in our generation, in Gen X and also boomers to some degree, we feel like we had to and have to earn everything we get. We don't show up to work with a degree and feel like I have this life experience now, which is perfectly valuable. And I have a couple of sons who are, fairly recent college graduates. So I understand. Showing it up to the workplace as maybe a recent grad or someone who's in Gen Z, with that inquisitive mind and respect for the wisdom that surrounds you, I think is really, really important. And that said, I also have to and had to and have worked on seeing people who are new in the workplace and being incredibly excited by some of the new perspectives that they bring to the table. So I think just remembering who we all are as humans and the sort of ecosystem of age at work can really help us to lead with kindness and have mutual respect. And if you demonstrate those things, you get a lot better work out of everybody.
Completely agreed. So Lauren?
Yeah, I totally agree with what everyone said. Having mutual respect is incredibly important. Kind of not letting those stereotypes that might be comfortable to mar your judgment, because as we've seen, we're all individuals, but we're all quite similar. Even through this conversation, I've kind of realized that Mark and I are kind of the opposite side of the coin, but we've kind of had the similar struggles, kind of the miscommunication or kind of not knowing about the workplace that we're in. So it's kind of interesting, like kind of having these conversations with the people in your workplace and kind of seeing how we're all alike, you know?
I love, because that's actually what it's all about, right? To really meet the individual and not really getting caught up in what those stereotypes may be. And the idea of mentorship, right? Erin, Kate, you mentioned that, but it's also the idea of reverse mentorship, right? So what does that look like? So we actually, with each generation, I love it. So, as we've kind of are wrapping up this segment of the discussion, again, very insightful, and thank you so much for imparting all your pearls of wisdom. So thank you all. And again, I want to kind of point out that we're more alike than different, if you think about that, as far as having some of those same anxieties, sometimes just at different ends of the spectrum.